So welcome to episode 3 with Aaron and Andrew. Little housekeeping right off the bat. So we've been out of production for 2 weeks because, well, really we wanted to get a bigger hold over this topic. We wanted to talk about social media, how it's impacting virtually our entire lives and the lives of every generation in front of us. And there's a lot to cover. There was a lot of content to go through, to dive into, and to sort into actual consumable
talking about the
bits
history
of information.
Yeah, talking about the history of how it all came to be, how these social media companies actually work, how they affect elections, how they're affecting misinformation spread, outrage culture. There's so many different lines to go into that it really was worth the extra week of building material. And on the other end of it, we're also working on a little 10, 15 minute like video clip series type of thing that we want to do. And so we were playing around with that too. And so as we get everything a little bit more dialed in, we're hoping to be a weekly podcast with some extra little videos filtered in there.
But Stavi and I are both full-time workers, full-time students. And so fitting this into our schedule is obviously a commitment that we're working on.
Yeah, this is purely a passion hobby thing on top of the 70, 80 hour work weeks we already have. So yeah, just trying to make it work as best as possible.
But so that takes us into our topic of the week, topic du jour. So that's topic of the day. But anyways, and it's social media, and it's a doozy. Like it's not just about the policies of each social media company, but it's also about media in general and about our First Amendment and essentially what the entirety of America is built upon. And what defines democracy. So this goes really deep. It's a hard topic to really unpack, and it's going to take a lot of organized thought, organized talk, and we're going to do our best today. We spent 2 weeks and more diving into this topic, but there's always going to be more coming up, and every day, literally a new news article comes up related to social media, related to censorship, and all of this is so pertinent to the election that's coming up on Tuesday. I want to get this podcast out this weekend. That way, if anybody has any desire to listen before the election, they have the opportunity.
Totally. And, I also want to mention a big motivation to talk about this was I watched the documentary, The Social Dilemma on Netflix. I've also seen The Great Hack before, which is another documentary talking specifically about Cambridge Analytica and their effect on the 2016 election and other elections around the world. And they're great documentaries that really play and connect a lot of ideas, give you visualizations, and it was a huge eye-opener. So I really recommend you guys go to there to get a good base, and we are going to highlight a lot of what's talked in there, but kind of go deeper and then really extrapolate ideas based off a lot of the stuff that's on there. So everyone needs to be as informed as possible. And so, yeah, those are 2 great other sources to get information on.
If you haven't watched The Social Dilemma, pause this, go watch it right now. We're going to be going much deeper than the ideas explored on Social Dilemma, but it paints a picture in a very vivid and detailed way that really highlights the complexity and the depth of the problem at hand, and essentially how we are no longer in control of our attention,
right? And
how we're being manipulated and sold based on our attention. So it's pervasive in how it makes you think about how you spend your time on your phone. And it's something that if you watch it, please heed how you feel while you're watching it, because it made me feel sick. And I know plenty of people are going to watch something like The Social Dilemma or hear what we're saying and want to turn off. They're going to want to escape from those thoughts, escape from those feelings because it's gross.
Right.
But you need to pay attention to that feeling rather than escape from it.
Totally. Yeah. And at the end, we're going to give some personal recommendations to how to protect yourself from some of the exploitation that's happening through social media and through the advertisers that use social media. But yeah, let's jump into it. So I think a good place to start is to talk about the advertiser model, because that's what all these companies operate by. That's how they make money. And so what that means is they sell your profile to advertisers, and then they use your profile to help predict what actions you'll take. And so they can kind of target you. And to kind of go a little bit deeper into the advertiser model, what happens is every little page you look at, the time in which you look at each page or post has these algorithms, these supercomputers with all these companies are just gathering data on you. And once they get enough, they could get a really good profile of what type of characteristics that you have. Are you narcissistic? You know, what things do you like? What political party do you have? What, you know, your religion biases, all these different things. And what they do is they create a model of your predicted behavior. And then that best model that predicts behavior wins out to these advertisers, because they can then, with more and more guarantee, get you to act on their ads. And so basically what they're doing is running a huge social experiment on all your different little triggers and then selling that to the highest bidder without any real care or contemplation on why those advertisers are using those ads and what is their overarching like goal behind it. That's out of the scope of what the social media companies care about. Their main things are engagement, growth, and advertisers, because that's how they make their money.
So essentially, just to kind of sum up, it's an amoral marketplace, right? Where it's strictly about getting the product, and you are the product.
Right.
Right. Your attention is the product, and selling it to the highest bidder. And these sales are happening at like 3 cents of you. You know, there's not anything super expensive. So you're a really cheap product. Just put that in perspective. And it's happening billions of times throughout. I don't even billions of times, a day, an hour. It's happening all the time.
Right.
But it's something you notice, right? You start noticing it. On some days it's happening more, on some days it's happening less. And it's really just amount of them turning the dials and selecting like, oh, we're going to up the amount of advertisements in this area. Or this.
If you want to look at the scale, there's 2 billion Facebook users a day. So 2 billion people go on Facebook to scroll through their page or whatever they do on Facebook. I don't really use Facebook. I use some of the other social media sites. But when you scroll through, how many ads do you see each time you go on? And then, so let's say you saw 5 ads and you're just one of the 2 billion users, you know, that scales up to there's 10 billion ads a day. Right. And that's a really small number on like how, and that's not exactly how it works, but just looking at the scale of how many ads there are out there. And the whole goal to this model is for you not to notice your behavior change. So if you've ever gone on and you, like, for example, the other day, I like plain blank t-shirts, and I was talking at work with some buddies and I was like, oh yeah, I want to get some new t-shirts or whatever. And then I went on to Instagram that day and I was scrolling through and there's a bunch of ads for packages of blank t-shirts. And I was like, oh my God, like they have to be listening to me to do this. But no, they've literally, with all these little tiny micro expressions of my personality, have been able to predict that I want blank t-shirts somehow, some way. That's how sophisticated these AIs are. They have billions of data points on people that are able to create a model that gets better and better and better. And we're going to dive in a little bit onto how these work, because it's not just growing on getting you better and better and like predicting your habits and preferences better, but it's also getting you to change your behavior in a way so you act more predictable. So it's not only understanding you better, but it's literally changing how you think about the world and how you think about anything.
It's small nudges, and it's essentially hacking your brain. It's billions of dollars put into algorithms and AI. It's the best computers, the best network against your evolved brain. Right. And the computers are going to win every single time. But the problem that they face is when you get to start thinking, when you get to start analyzing,
right,
then you have an opportunity to take control of your behavior. So it's in their interest to prevent you from analyzing, prevent you from thinking, prevent you from using your frontal cortex and your prefrontal cortex, prevent you from using that part of your brain that can make you less easy to predict. So I know I'm jumping a little bit.
No, this is perfect. No,
okay.
Go continue.
But their incentive then is to trigger your limbic system, to trigger your amygdala, to trigger extreme emotional states, because in those emotional states, you're not able to access logic. You're not able to say, oh, right, I only came on here because I wanted to look at one thing.
Right.
You get to see something that either triggers excitement, anger, outrage, sadness doesn't really take people through. So
when you're in fear, you become way more predictable, basically. And when you are in fear, you're in your limbic system part of your brain, which is all about automatic responses. It's not about high level thinking and rationalization to coming to outcomes. It's instant.
So when you're in this less complex place, your behaviors are easier to predict. And what that means is if they're able to capture your attention, they're better off at predicting you, keeping that intention on the program, on the platform, and showing you the next thing that has been tested and proven to capture attention and to keep attention.
Right. So yeah, let's go right into like how YouTube recommendation algorithm works. So first off, 70% of all watch time on YouTube comes directly from recommended videos. That totals to 1 billion hours of people consume of watch time per day.
Per day?
Yeah, that is insane. That's how many users are on there, and it's been growing and growing. I think it's well over an hour a day by the average person, almost to 2 hours a day at this point. But so yeah, that's just showing you the scale of how many people are watching based off these recommendations. And so, okay, how does YouTube recommend people? What are the triggers that then makes the AI produce the recommended list? And the way that they capture engagement while at the same time harnessing fear is by recommending incrementally more extremist and extremist views on any topic. So like, obviously this is played out in conspiracy theories a lot, right? And so, for example, if you look up the flat Earth, right? Just you type in flat Earth, 90% of the videos it's going to recommend is flat Earth conspiracy theories rather than flat Earth debunking videos. And where right there, it just highlights that it's not focusing on recommending you the truth about whatever you're interested in. It's recommending whatever thing is going to spike your attention to be able to stay on the video longer. And it's scientifically proven that fear and conspiratorial type of stories that really focus in on your limbic system reacting to it create longer and longer attention times, basically. And
again, the reason your engagement is sought after, right, is so they can continue selling your attention to companies. Now, I have a YouTube whatever Red, or I don't know what it's called anymore. They changed the name so many times, but I have like a premium account. I pay $10 a month, so I don't see advertisements. And so I can think, oh, I'm in the clear. They don't want my attention, but they're still they still have an impetus to keep my attention because accounts are getting paid for views. They're able to recommend other videos that might lead me to making purchases from their Amazon links. But more than that, there's actually incentive to keep attention because then it justifies my paying $10. Like, so if I only watched one video a week, I might cancel my subscription. Like Netflix started the immediate play, the instant play when you go to like hover over a movie or a TV show, right, because it was proven that, that will keep people on for longer. And they're not showing you any advertisements. But what they did see was that when people only watched a few videos a month, they were more likely to cancel their subscription.
Right.
So even companies who aren't incentivized to sell your attention are still incentivized to keep your attention because we're essentially in an attention marketplace. Anywhere you look, attention is the number one commodity.
Right. And that's why when you talk about an amoral system, the algorithm is not capable of judging intent. It's not capable of judging truth. All it's capable is judging through the metrics of how long do you watch this video, how many more videos like this did you watch after, and then based off if it's a big data profile on you, how can I get what do other similar people who watch similar videos, like how do they project their future views? And then it's just this compiling of data and data and data until it predicts how and why you would watch a certain video before you even know it. It's literally systematically sets you up. And so an example of how it's amoral, this was caught, I believe it was 2014. But so there is this thing where people who watched a lot of workout videos, there was like 1 in 100 chance, or there's some statistic that was better than maybe a normal average, that if you watch these workout videos, you would be a pedophile. And so what it did was it would recommend videos with little girls in it, because they're saying, oh, maybe the 1 out of 100, 1 out of 1,000, whatever it was, this person would actually be a pedophile. And so they will like watching videos of little girls. And if you really break that down, it's just the algorithm working based off of numbers and statistics. And it's leading, this is a very specific example of how it can lead people into very undesirable outcomes and behaviors just based off of their perception or their profile of who they potentially could be.
A less pernicious but probably more damaging example is when people would search for diet videos.
Right.
They would end up showing more and more anorexic videos. So and not like things that were an expose on anorexia, but videos that were suggesting essentially like minor starvation and like drinking a lot of water instead of eating, and watching your weight drop 1 pound at a time. And it was promoting anorexia. And it wasn't like YouTube was like, oh yeah, we're going to promote anorexia. It was just, that's what this algorithm does. And you might think, oh, well, I don't click on recommended videos, so I'm out of that system. But so we said 70% of the videos come from recommendations, but 99.999% of video choices come from the algorithm. And what that means is, even if you don't click on recommended videos, how do you think the top of your search list comes up? It's from the algorithm. You search something, you're not in charge of what you get to see, because like millions of hours of videos, I think much more than this, but I'm being conservative. Millions of hours of videos are loaded up every hour.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's a conservative estimate. But so you have no choice, a 0.0001% choice of actually getting to pick your video. And that involves typing in the account you want to see it from, what video on that account. And like if people were to search for our videos, they would have to go through pages and pages before they found it. We have to send out a link because there's no shot of you finding this video on your own.
It's literally a greedy algorithm. That's like the term that people within YouTube use. It's like a technical way to describe the algorithm, where literally when you first post it, within the first 12 hours, if you don't get a huge spike in views, it automatically goes on the bottom of the list and will never be recommended. So what does that do? That opens up all kind of exploitation to game the system, to buy artificial views, to get another computer, basically, to get a whole bunch of robot views, or also what does that do? Hey, I'm not going to give you a video that is truthful or fully part of the truth, because that is not as exciting as something that is a little bit more spicy and a little bit more jaded, because that's instantly going to get more reaction. And then so what happens? All those videos over time get stacked to the top. So whenever you type in 9/11, because you want to watch a video on it, you're going to get, there was over 15 billion Alex Jones conspiracy theory recommendations for 9/11, where it's like you're forced into these extremist views, whether you're aware of them or not. When you find interest in a topic, these views are forced upon you in a way that makes them appear and seem more real than they really are. And just by incrementally increasing extremist views and activating your fear response, everyone is just on edge, and it leads to this outrage type of culture, which is our whole last podcast that we talked about was how much of an outrage and how emotion driven everything was. And we weren't able to take a step back and assess the situation from, a neutral state. And literally these algorithms are making us be in this like emotional state for a huge portion of our day. You know, I think in the Philippines, the average person is on the internet 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
So it's like if someone's on the internet 10 hours a day, and let's say they're only on social media sites 4 of those hours, that means 4 hours. That's a third of their waking day, or fourth of their waking day on completely fear-ridden edge.
Well, even if it's not fear-ridden, it's limbic system.
Yeah,
dominant.
exactly.
So
yeah.
it's something that's behind or underneath the cortical system. And the scary thing is that neuroplasticity is real throughout the entirety of your life. So neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to rewire, to prune neural pathways that aren't being used and to strengthen neural pathways that are.
Right.
And so that means you get good at what you do a lot of. And if you're spending 4 hours a day strictly using your limbic system, your cortical system is withering. Right. You're becoming less able to dictate your own behavior, to examine your own behavior, to be self-aware, to be able to make the hard decision in moments when you have some sort of choice to make. And you're literally getting worse at it. And it's like, the cortical system is the most important part of your brain. It's what is most easily adapted to your environment. And right now we're being forced into this place where it's not being used.
And think about how difficult it is for adults to handle this manipulation. Well, think about children that their whole frontal cortex is still developing, right? They're still learning how to do things. And now most of the younger generation doesn't watch cable TV. They're not watching Nickelodeon, where there's actual rules and guidelines to the type of commercials, like all these different protections for kids for protections from advertisers for kids on TV aren't there on social media sites or like YouTube. And so imagine when there's a kid who's 8 years old and, you know, they go on to watch Barney, and slowly they start getting recommended more extremist and violent and fearful videos. And like, imagine what type of personality traits and fears this kid will develop, you know? And
well, and there's a YouTube for kids, right? There's a YouTube for kids, but so they do get to limit what kids see, but they aren't limiting links. So the thing was, there wasn't allowed to be URLs on TV commercials. There wasn't allowed to be something that would take kids away from the television screen. But on YouTube, they can have links. On YouTube, there are allowed to have URLs so that kids' attention can be taken away from the video and onto another website where they can be sold things, where they can be sold ideas.
Right. Well, and like another little tiny way that they keep your attention going, they keep you watching that next video, is they start playing the next video on YouTube before your video ends. There'll be a little countdown, like 3, 2, 1, and then the next video starts before the one you were watching ends. And it never gives you a mental space, a mental break to make a decision. That's why when you watch TV, anytime they go to a commercial, there's a black screen for, even if it's just half of a second, because that triggers your brain to make a choice to say, hey, am I going to sit here and continue watching, or am I going to do something else? And especially when it's targeted on kids, they're gaming their developing mind to get them to just constantly be glued to the screen, basically.
Well, to make it so you don't have to make a decision. This goes beyond kids, goes to adults too. Like it makes it so you don't have an opportunity to use your frontal cortex. You don't have an opportunity to assess what you're doing, to make a decision. How many times have you gone on to look at one thing on Instagram or YouTube or Facebook, and then 20 minutes later realized, because something called your attention off of your screen, that, oh shit, what was I even looking for?
Yeah.
You didn't even get to the thing. That's how powerful. I mean, everybody has experienced this. I experience this multiple times a week. Mm-hmm. And I consider myself a very low time user of social media. But even still, I will go on Instagram to look at one person's one post and get completely lost, even if it's only for 5 minutes. And then I go, oh shit, what was I doing on here?
Yeah.
It is that powerful. So, because I know when I first started hearing about this, I had this egotistical sense of like, oh, well, not me.
Totally.
And it's so beyond you. It's so beyond me. It's something that's so much more powerful than our individual brains. And more than that, it's not about you. Yeah. It's about what it can do to the society at large. And
well, hold on. Honestly, too, like if you're watching this, you're probably not as vulnerable as someone who's not watching this video or someone who hasn't seen the social dilemma, who's aware of it. But the problem is,
hello, what are you doing? You're just blowing smoke up their butts or what?
No, well, hold on, let me get to it. Which that may be true. Like, you're not the most vulnerable person, but by repetition, not only are the systems getting better to where you will be vulnerable once the systems get smart enough, but all those people who are vulnerable and are creative behavior change, guess what? Those are the masses. And then the masses create all kind of cultural shifts and change that you are then attached with. You are a part of that culture. And when you have hundreds of millions and billions of people being affected to think and behave in certain ways, that will trickle to you and you will be affected. So even if you think you are above vulnerability, you will be affected in so many little type of ways. And that's only going to continue for you to be more and more vulnerable. And, with all that said, YouTube's main goal is to grow 30% every year. And if you think about how many users, like I said, 1 billion hours of total watch time a day, and they still want 30% growth. When you say, hey, some of these algorithms are unethical, we need to change them. That is never going to overpower their desire for growth and more monetary value, basically. And that's why, it has to be forced down their throats through social and public awareness, basically.
Well, and the thing is, so a lot of people hold hope for some sort of policy change, for something to come in from the government, some regulatory board to come in. But this advertising model provides the powers that be more power. So there will never be a moment where the people who are able to use this attention model to their advantage are going to say, oh yeah, we got to change this. Right now, the public is in the most manipulatable place that it's ever been. It's so easy to nudge population, 1% to the right, 1% to the left, 1%, whatever.
No barriers in place to prevent that from happening.
So the idea that policy change is going to happen of its own accord is completely out the window. This needs to be a grassroots movement. This needs to be tech companies coming in to regulate themselves for the benefit of humanity.
I think this is a great transition point for us to let's get into, okay, how has regulation happened in the past when it came to radio, TV, the beginning of the internet? How did we handle these things before? Because I know this might sound as if wow, you're being fear rattling in a sense. That's what they said TVs were going to melt people's minds. When the TVs first came out, and what's the difference? If anything, I like these advertising models because then I'm actually looking at things that I want. I understand that there could be that perception, but really when you dive into the exploitation of US elections and all these other huge ideological movements, it's impossible not to see the immediate need for change.
Well, and it's beyond whether you like the fact that the advertisements are targeted at you now, because oh, well, at least I'm getting to see things that I want. It's beyond that. It's about the truth. And when we don't have any regulatory board, when we don't have any metrics that determine what can be put in front of you by a paid advertisement, we lose our grasp on truth.
Right.
And this is a completely different topic, but the amount of synthetic information that is about to be flooding the market, whether that's photographs that don't exist or videos that don't exist, through deep fakes, it's
writing, actual audio, everything.
This information is about to flood the market. It's already on the market.
Right.
And there needs to be something in place, some sort of mechanism that can protect us from these untruths.
Exactly.
And it's a scary place we're headed towards. So I know, like you were saying, it sounds like we're trying to conjure up fear and do the exact thing we're trying to go against, but it's something that we need to bring our attention to, and bringing awareness to this process is probably the only way to prevent it from getting worse, exponentially.
And the difference is everything is on an exponential curve. The rate at which we're creating new ways to create more data, more little preference points on your profile, and at the same time creating better and better models that can use that data. What it is now compared to what it is next year is like a 10-year increase back in the TV age. It's on an exponential curve. So there is no, oh, it's a problem, we'll get to it. Every single year the problem doubles, triples, and it becomes harder and harder to get away from it. So we're having court hearings. Like there was one yesterday, like there's documentaries coming out. Like I think the way that these elections and outrage culture has been so visible, I think people are finally starting to wake up to it. But it actually, we need to make the change as soon as we possibly can, because it's just getting so far worse that we're not going to be able to come out from it.
And to that point, it's like over the last 2 years, 90% of the data in the world was generated. So, and that has ever been generated. So up until the 90s, that would be 10% of information ever created. And then of the last 2 years, 90% of the information ever created was made. So,
and this information, is it like legit information?
No, this is just like bits. This is just like gigabytes. So content, this is just content that was created. So like the amount of information is increasing exponentially.
Right.
Every 2 years, that number holds true, that it's 90% of the data ever created is made in the last 2 years.
Right.
So those gaps are getting bigger and bigger.
And these computers can take in all that data. That's what they're designed to do. It would be impossible for humans to take in all that data and be able to exploit it. But not with these supercomputers.
But to that point, regulation needs to happen in some way, shape, or form. And so we're going to get into exactly what regulation has looked like for other forms of media and where it all sits and why there's contention around regulation, because it all circles around the number one amendment that America was built on, the First Amendment, protection of free speech. And this goes obviously back to the Constitution, but it was really fleshed out in John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. And he talked about the problems of having a government censor false or harmful speech because the government might judge it to be wrong. Mm-hmm. And so he set the precedent way back then, not to censor harmful speech, not to censor lies, because the idea is that the truth will out, that the better argument will win on the intellectual floor.
Right.
And so this set the precedent that nobody's to be censored. Nobody is to be prevented from speaking. Nobody's to stop lies from spreading. And this idea alone, outside of media, was held up by the Supreme Court multiple times. And in the 60s, the Supreme Court struck down a law that was used to arrest a KKK leader for speaking at a rally, and prevented the government from punishing lying speech or malicious speech unless it encouraged an imminent lawless action. So any lie could be told unless it essentially sparked a riot or caused undue violence. And from there, they said, oh yeah, you can lie all you want as long as you don't start a riot. So this isn't an archaic idea that just hasn't been talked about in a long time. It's there and it's continuing to be upheld.
Right. But there's a reason, I forgot what the group was, but there's a group of Jewish lawyers, and they famously defended white supremacist groups' ability to protest and their free speech, because they know, even though that they were actually Holocaust survivors, and they represented a group of white supremacists for their right to protest and free speech and voice their opinion, because they knew if we suppress that as a nation, then anyone's speech could be censored and can be oppressed, basically. And so there's such a fundamental value to be able to allow all speech to be told, and then that way the best and most truthful thing could win out, hopefully, over time. If it's not exploited through supercomputers.
Well, and the purpose of free speech is to encourage democratic participation and grant the sense that the government belongs to the people. It's foundational for a reason. It's something to be protected. It's not something to like throw away or like, oh, well, forget about free speech. But there's coming a point where free speech is threatening democracy as much as it's providing for its flourishing. So it's
right, because we have bad actors taking advantage of free speech to purposely set off misinformation to manipulate you to think and act in certain ways.
So it's a double-edged sword, and it's a place where it's like, well, we're kind of held between a rock and a hard place, and it's this thing that's setting us free that it's also creating our shackles.
Right.
And John Stuart Mill never met an algorithm.
Exactly.
You know, like, so yes, everybody should be allowed to speak, but it's about what should be allowed to be broadcast to everybody. What should be allowed to be spread by financial means.
Right.
And so with that, we're going to start talking about the radio, about television, and about what regulatory acts have been put in place already and what have been stripped, because it's important to note that there used to be more policies protecting the public from malicious information, and that those policies have been one by one stripped so that essentially conglomerates had greater control over what information is presented in front of the individual.
Right.
So starting back in 1934, FCC was created, Communications Act was created, and it essentially required anyone with a broadcasting license to operate with the public interest at heart. They were responsible for the public receiving factual information, and each licensee was responsible for putting out unbiased information, and it was a requirement for them to get licensure the following year. And these acts were upheld in 1941 by a Supreme Court decision about TV ownership rules. And were continued to grow. So in 1949, the fairness doctrine came into being, which required broadcasters to present both political sides to a story. They had to cover major public debate, to notify public figures of any attacks to be made upon their name, so they had an opportunity to rebuke and rebut. It's essentially made it so that TV stations weren't able to be partisan. If they were to show a partisan view, they had to give opportunity to the other party to talk about their side of the coin.
Right. Yeah. So the licensing, it happens so that way, you couldn't own a newspaper, and
we haven't talked about that yet.
Okay. So go over the first thing that you said. They had to operate with the public interest at heart. Yeah. And the licensing.
That was just about, that wasn't about the TV ownership and the newspaper things yet.
Okay.
But anyways,
I thought, I got a little ahead of myself. I thought in order to have a license, you couldn't operate a newspaper and a TV station at the same time.
So that was a ruling in 1945. That's something that was like, I felt like that wasn't quite related. So I was getting into this first. So hold your horses.
Okay.
But so the networks had a public service obligation, and the news hour essentially fulfilled their duty to serve the public, and they needed to do this to renew their license.
Right. And wasn't this true for newspapers as well? Not just what you see on TV? It was any like media type
and this
of
was
source?
Mostly about the FCC. So this was about TV and radio.
Okay.
But related, it was a 1945 Supreme Court decision that upheld media ownership rules, and this is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it found that mergers, that narrow dissemination of information, are unconstitutional. So it essentially outlined the fact that somebody who owned a TV station couldn't own a newspaper in the same region, and same with radio. It couldn't prevent the variability of information put out,
because they could grab a dominant hold on the overall ideology of that area if they could control multiple vectors of information coming.
Mm-hmm. So far we have a ruling that says one company can't own all of the media sources in a region. We have a ruling that says if a newscaster is to put out some sort of partisan idea, they have to give an opportunity to the other party to rebuke or rebut that decision. And there was the Equal Times Act, and the Equal Times Act essentially said the same thing, but that if a company or a channel gives a paid advertisement spot to one party, they have to give an opportunity to the other party to also pay for advertising at a similar rate.
Yeah.
So far we have these three foundations that seem to provide for nonpartisan factual information to be broadcast to the public.
Right. So if you were Fox News and you gave a pro-life political ad, and you charge $2 million for a 30-second ad, you would also have to offer a pro-choice ad for around $2 million at 30 seconds. And that way you can't flood your viewership with one type of ideology. You have to provide both, at least opportunity for both sides to be heard, which isn't in effect now, but was back then.
Yeah. So then beginning in the Reagan era, this is in the 80s, the FCC decided they could waive the rule that barred single entity from owning both a TV station and a newspaper on a case-by-case basis. So suddenly, instead of saying nobody can own newspapers and TVs in the same region, it was like, oh, well, we'll decide as we see fit. As long as it doesn't prevent the dissemination of a wide array of news, we'll allow it. And so all a company had to do was prove that there was actually another company that provided a different type of news to say like, well, look, we're not preventing that news from happening. So clearly we should be able to buy this.
Now I just want to like kind of talk about this for a little bit. Yes, that's true that there's multiple sources with different viewpoints. But the thing is usually people have a sense of brand loyalship or they have loyalty, and they, watch the same Fox or CNN or whatever their, station of choice is. And by not having each station show multiple points of views, if your viewership is just glued on yours, they'll never see that other point of view, or they will only see it in the negative light in which their station presents it. So it's like, when I first read that, I was like, well, yeah, I guess that's true that like, well, the other sides of the argument are available. But then when you just look at it, you're just like, oh no, well, people are hyperbolic in their patterns and their habits, and they stick. You'll find it very rare that someone watches every single type of news media outlet to be able to get every type of partisan view, right?
But I mean, at this point in time, it's just waived the rule that barred one entity from owning multiple media sources in a region. So they haven't revoked the fairness doctrine yet.
Okay.
So far, that still holds true.
Okay. I'm jumping ahead.
You're just jumping the gun. But
I don't got the timeline sitting in front of me.
Then in 1987, the FCC wound up repealing the fairness doctrine.
Right.
So now we already have one company can own multiple sources of information in the same region. And they don't have to afford the opposing viewpoint to have time or opportunity to speak on their channel. So that social compact that broadcasters took to cover the truth from a neutral ground, that thing that made these very renowned men, like known for speaking the truth, was completely stripped from the business. They didn't have to present multiple sides to an argument. They didn't have to grant public figures an opportunity to defend themselves. Now we have Fox News and MSNBC talking strict partisan news. They're, able to essentially speak opinions.
This is late 80s, right?
Yeah, this is 1987, before Fox came into being, before any of this happened.
Totally.
But it has led to opinions being able to be spouted without any need to talk about the facts behind those opinions or to provide opposing viewpoint opinions.
Yeah, and real quick on that, so right in the 80s and during the Reagan administration, that's when there was the war on drugs and that whole movement, which we talked about in our last podcast, and all the negative effects of that. And I think what you can see here is the removal of these protections for the people consuming the information, the nation, the citizens. Then the government was allowed to exploit those rules to spread their propaganda or information in order to get real change in perception and opinion by its citizens. And I think right here at the late 80s is where you really see that first coming into play. And I think today there's more further manipulation on it and less obligation, that it's even worse than it was back then. But I think that's a great little place to look as, hey, this is when a lot of this propaganda machine was really unleashed.
Well, and it wasn't quite released to the public, but the foundation was built.
Exactly.
Right? It was like, oh, okay,
it was the start of it.
Now we're set up.
Exactly.
And it was set up in the 80s. It wasn't quite taken advantage of yet. But then came 1996. And in 1996, two very important things happened. One, the Communication Decency Act came into fruition. A specific one that we're going to be looking at, or a specific part of that, is the Section 230. And the other thing that happened was Robert Murdoch and Roger Ailes started Fox News. So coincidence that it's in the same year, but Let's dive in. So the CDA 230, Communication Decency Act 230, sounds nice, right? It's all about decency. Clever naming. But the ramifications of it have been anything but decent. So 3 main points in this, and there's plenty of words, plenty of sections of this article, but 3 main points. One is that the main idea is to encourage the development of technologies which maximize user control over what information is received by individuals, families, and schools who use the internet and other interactive computer services. This wasn't a main idea. This is a main idea that hasn't been talked about much. Yeah. So this is in Section B, Article or number 3. Section 3B3.
I was like, that sounded good.
Yeah, this sounds really good. It's essentially made it so that with this act, TV stations needed to adopt TV models needed to adopt the V chip, something where you're able to see ratings and you're able to decide whether this is right for my kid to watch, whether it's, you suddenly are able to see a TV mature or TV 13.
It was the first attempt at like choice by users to tell what they want censored, not for the, internet company or the cable company to censor it on their own obligations or rules. It's letting the user be able to pick.
And again, this was to encourage the development of technologies that maximize user control. So this isn't something that we're going to talk about too much right now, but it's something to keep in your back pocket because it's important for potential things we can do moving on into the future. Right. So the main things of CDA 230 was to act as the shield and the sword for internet companies and for media companies. What that means, the shield, it was going to protect these companies from being sued for what individuals posted on their websites. And the sword was, it was able to strip people's postings on their website. They could regulate information at will. And both of these served to essentially promote the growth of the internet. That was the main point of the CDA, was to promote the growth of the internet, to promote the growth of the economy, and to allow the internet to flourish, because everyone saw how great it was going to be. They didn't want things to get in the way of its growth.
And real quick, although because of this, there's been huge exploitation by these social media companies and big tech companies now, but when this was first written, it did serve its purpose and allow the internet to really grow. It allowed whole new industries to develop. But at the time that this was created, there was no supercomputers with algorithms that did the things that they do today. So although it was effective, at least in allowing the internet to grow and allow companies to grow with it, it now today is doing the opposite, where it's allowing these companies who have control over the internet to keep their control, keep their monopolization, and to do all the stuff that we're talking about, right? It protects them while at the same time giving them right to do whatever they want to whatever's on their platform.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read the exact verbiage just so you have an idea. So CDA 230, Section C1, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So the host of a website isn't going to be treated as the publisher of somebody who posts on that website. This is what grants people or companies like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, complete reprieve from the liability regarding what people post on their websites, right? So they're not held responsible. They didn't create it, and they can't be held liable for whoever else created it. So that was the shield that I talked about, right? The other part, the sword, is no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be held liable on account of any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access to or availability of material that provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. So in regular terms, this means that these companies can actually take down information, whether protected by the Constitution or not, at their own will. And so they're able to do this based on their community values. That way they don't get shit on by the public. But so now these websites, these companies are essentially off the hook.
Right.
So that sets the tone for what's to come in the future. So this is back in 1996. There's no algorithms yet. There's no AI. Nobody's paying advertised posts, and nobody's able to really spread information or disinformation at the rate or speed they are now. So this was great in 96.
Right. Yeah. And so, and now today, obviously all that's changed. So what you have is, by default, these companies all had a almost zero censorship policy at the beginning, where they didn't block, misinformation, positive information, any type of information pretty much was allowed to be on these platforms. But then there was this huge pressure, especially from the Democratic Party within the United States, to basically censor disinformation. So one that's reading in the papers today is taking off Holocaust denier pages on Facebook and on Twitter. And so there was this big push for these companies to now start regulating themselves on censorship, right? And so that led them to do it, but they had full control over how they did it, the exact and the problem with it was the vagueness of what they told us their metrics were. And in my opinion, their ability to even understand exactly how the algorithms that are supposed to protect this disinformation actually work. And so that was pushed by mostly the left political party. And now you're seeing in the news about the Hunter Biden New York Post article being basically censored and slowed through spread, that now the right is saying, hey, who the hell are you? Who are you as these big companies to determine what's free speech and what's allowed to be said and what's not allowed to be said? Who are you to censor us? That's not your role. That's not your job. So it's just a perfect example of how our democratic process is working right now, where you have each side of the aisle is on completely separate spectrums of what they even want, not to mention their lack of understanding what the actual real problems are. So that's just kind of laying it out where we're at right now.
Scary stuff.
Yeah.
It's really, it's scary. Well, and the other thing, so CDA 230 happened in 96. What also happened in 96, which is the year of our unraveling, the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Essentially, that thing that the FCC did back in 87, where they're on a case-by-case basis, we're going to determine whether somebody can own a TV station and a newspaper. 96, the Telecommunications Act was laid out as we're going to just create a more open market and give more opportunity for people to own media corporations, and made that not a case-by-case basis, but made it just the law that, anybody can own anything. And so Telecommunications Act of 96 opened the door for big media conglomerates. That same year, Fox News came into fruition. And I don't even need to say anything about Fox News. Everybody should have a bright idea about what's going on.
But that bill read as it's supposed to basically allow more growth and diversity and more companies, but what
opened the door to competition is what it was supposed to do.
But what it really happened was, hey, the biggest players out there gobbled up everything else and became basically pseudo monopolies, and then we turned into the age of you get all your media from Fox News that then has reaches into 15 other news sources and articles. So you're reading one article doesn't have Fox News on it, thinking, I'm trying to look at news sources, but really they're all part of the same company, the same overarching ideology. And it's just so clear that they have a clear mission for how they want people to think and behave. And so they spread that through their organizations as propaganda.
Well, and it's become centralized news sources, right? So it's one hub that is broadcasting one idea, and all of these local news agencies are picking up that same idea and broadcasting it from that source. Beyond Fox News, another entity that came into fruition was Sinclair News, and they have rounded up more than 1,800 local news entities to broadcast one centralized view. And these news entities, by the way, are seemingly separate. They're stations of CBS, ABC, NBC, CW, and Fox.
Right.
All of those can have the potential of being owned by one news agency, Sinclair News. And so they're able to harness one viewpoint and broadcast it at will. No regulation anymore, no need for fairness, no need for variability, no need to present the opposing viewpoint. It's all allowed now. It's open season on opinion. And this has just been extrapolated even further. This guy, Brian Timpone, I don't have the information in front of me, but I'm going off of memory. This guy, Brian Timpone, he essentially orchestrated a network of pseudo local news outlets. So there's over the last decade, several small newspapers have been dying, right? Because people aren't buying the newspapers anymore. They're not going to these news sources because they're able to go to these big companies who seemingly have more credibility and more authority. And so there's been this gap in local news. People have been craving local news. So this guy, Brian Timpone, is like, sweet, I'll fill this local news void and provide, this is like on several about sections of these websites, provide objective data-driven information without political bias. This guy, Brian Timpone, his service has created almost 1,300 news sites that appear to be local news. Across every single state, there are websites that have like, the Santa Rosa Times, or, it's something that sounds local. The majority of the articles on these websites are collected by some sort of AI algorithm. Yeah. And the articles that are original, that are, remember, objective and data-driven, are actually articles that are essentially assignments. Like they have a client who is typically a right-wing, either political affiliate or operative or think tank or corporate executive, and they put out like not necessarily a script, but you know how we have like your assignment, you have, what is it called that I'm looking for? Something that's like telling you what to do.
Procedure? Like
not a procedure, but like an essay. You have an essay prompt. There
prompt,
we go.
Yeah, okay.
It's a prompt put out, and these prompts are then sold, or they're given to freelance journalists, and they're told what to do, who to interview. So call up a Republican staffer and ask them, get a quote on this Democratic nominee or Democratic running person and candidate, and then write a story about it.
Yeah, and so it's coming up. They have the story that they want already set, and then they say, hey, go find facts, go find information to make this true. Mm-hmm. Not go look for information and create a story from that. They're saying, no, we already know what the answer is. Go make this sound true.
Exactly. It's not find the facts, it's write the story.
Right, exactly.
And that might sound like a very subtle difference, but the difference is huge. The difference is between fact and fiction.
Exactly.
And these 1,300 news sites that appear across the United States, these articles get picked up by mainstream news sources. Several of the articles have multiple millions of clicks because they were picked up by Fox News. They were retweeted. Right. They were spread around and put through the mill of media recycling. And this is just one example of how the stripping down of the protecting regulations can impact what we perceive as truth.
Yeah, and then now you have like Google News, which is like an aggregate news source, which basically runs their algorithm, and when based off of your attention preferences, not like truth-seeking preferences or whatever, it adds, now you're going to have it like systematically places the ads. So you have, fear, nice, entertaining, back to fear. And it cycles through, and it's using Fox News, CNN, all these main sources. So now it's not only these individual companies manipulating it, it's the big social media companies, Google, Alphabet, that basically manipulates that even further and uses all of these little little systems, which is Fox News and CNN, as extra ways to direct content to get you to stay working.
Well, and to kind of put a cap on that point, a paper from the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard found that disinformation campaigns are often an elite-driven, mass media-led process in which social media plays only a secondary supportive role. So that means it's actually up to these big media conglomerates to really create the authority, to create the credibility behind these articles that allows them to spread like wildfire across the social media planes.
Right.
And so it's not just social media that's the issue here. It's the responsibility of these big media conglomerates. They don't have responsibility.
Exactly.
anymore.
They're allowed to say whatever they want without liability if it's true or if it's correct or what it does to people. But at the same time, because they're the big news sources, they have credibility that makes people believe that they're true. And so they can say what they want. It doesn't have to be true, and there's no backlash on it.
And we have to remember too, this attention market that, has been brought into the limelight because of social media. It's been the attention market for a long time.
Yeah.
It's up to the TV channel to keep your attention so they can sell your attention to commercials. Right. This isn't new information. This has been around for a long time. It's just that it's getting better and better and better at keeping our attention.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Back, let's say in the 90s when you had TV, maybe you had a huge advertising company. Let's say you had 1,000 people working on this ad where they took out of all the statistics they had on all their viewers to try to come up with the ad that gets the most engagement, the most pull for your purchasing power, right? Well, now these supercomputers have billions of little basically advertising people that are making metrics on you, and they're not just doing it in broad terms. They're doing it on the micro level. They're doing it specific for you. Each different person has their own profile that has billions of advertising workers purely focused on you. It's insane.
Just laughing at because we keep saying billions.
Well, yeah, but I don't think people understand like billions. Like there's let's say they have 100 billion little data points that are always tinging on you. That's 10 times more than 10 times of the whole population of humans on the earth. It's insane. You're playing like they use in the social dilemma. You're playing against your chess opponent is a billion moves ahead of you, and you could only go 3 or 4. Like, you know what I mean?
If that,
yeah, exactly.
But so we have the regulation, and then followed quickly by the deregulation of the media, and it's left wild west.
Right.
Like where it's a lawless land and people can gun for your attention with whatever tools they have. There's nothing that says there's no like concealed carry permit required. It's just like they can use all the weapons they want. But so we went from 2006, Google buys YouTube, 2006, Facebook opens to the public, 2007, Twitter comes out the gate, 2010, Facebook buys Instagram.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then in 2010, Citizens United happens, right? So all of a sudden, the gateway is open for corporations and unions, unlimited spending toward political advocacy.
These companies are treated as individuals.
And so the First Amendment is now applied to corporations as much as it applies to the individual. And now this thing that was meant to protect the individual's right to speak is now used as the primary weapon for corporations to skew public opinion, to sway the public's view of the world, and to pay as much money as they want towards political movements, political campaigns.
Yeah.
And so this Citizens United thing in 2010 is a big deal, and we don't really talk about it much anymore, but corporations aren't individuals, and they don't have every right we have. But obviously, I'm wrong because that decision was made by much higher up, by a person who has much more expertise than I do.
Right. I think this is a good transition point to, like, because you just brought up elections. Okay, like.
Wait, hold up. I got one more thing.
All right,
2012, SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, protected intentional lies so long as they don't cause serious harm.
How do you determine serious harm?
Well, they have yet to really define it, and that's the exact vague term that companies and corporations get to say, hey, we didn't cause serious harm, because what exactly is serious harm? So they protect intentional lies so long as they don't cause serious harm, but nobody's defining serious harm. So essentially people can intentionally lie as long as there isn't a riot? No, because the riots happen.
Yeah. And this highlights the FCC's inability to actually enforce the laws that they make or enforce them properly, where it's like, hey, like there's these laws set in place that state protections, but over and over again, they have either denied that based on First Amendment issues, and Citizens United were like, hey, well, since you are an individual, even though you're Facebook that has billions of dollars coming in into your company of thousands of people, we're going to treat you as an individual. So you do get that amendment right. And guess what? We can't put this policy on you.
So yeah, now
so
corporations...
they have all that the FCC can do is protect the companies. They can't enforce the companies to protect the people. So it was created to protect the people. And now it is set up so it could only protect the companies.
Well, it can protect the people too, but obviously people that don't need to be protected.
But they can't enforce rulings on the companies that are in benefit of individuals now. It's crazy.
That's frustrating.
Yeah.
It's funny because it's like only when we start really talking about it, it's like, wait, what?
Yeah. and it just doesn't make sense when.
So now companies have the First Amendment right and can't be regulated.
Right. Yeah, they have ultimate power and control. And, like the U.S. government has no one to blame besides themselves, honestly. Yeah. And, that's why, like, there's so much going on right now with the election and, the state of our democracy, and it's saving our democracy is like a huge thing. And, We've had so many problems that are so much bigger than the standing president. These are legacy issues with the United States. And that's why it's the Senate's job. It's the congressmen and women that are elected. It's these people that are supposed to keep us, online as a country, as a nation. And then it's that president that's, supposed to basically drive us in certain directions, maybe a little bit more focused and whatnot, and give us an overarching sense of calm and authority of, we know what we're doing. And it's devolved into utter chaos. Nothing gets done. And the things that are focused on are just things that can be politicized to get attention so they can use these systems to then exploit that attention. It's insane.
Well, plenty is getting done. It's just in what direction?
Yeah, no, but they're using the systems to get the things done that only can be politicized, because if it can be politicized, then they can exploit that to stay in power, and it's like.
And just to, you talked about the hearings that have been happening recently, right?
No, not yet.
Okay. I feel like we mentioned it for a brief moment, but.
Yeah, a brief moment. So with the whole history of the FCC, and we talked a little bit about CDA 230, in real time, just yesterday, there's a hearing that a lot of the news media outlets have been saying that this was because of Twitter and Facebook slowing down the recommendations of the Hunter Biden New York Post article, which is basically very negative for the Biden campaign. And although the subpoenas were issued for these companies 2 weeks before this ever came out. So this is actually...
Well, and it was also about the labels that Twitter and Facebook was putting on certain fake news or about the spread of the coronavirus. So they were putting things on saying like, maybe look into this.
Yeah, exactly.
They weren't even that drastic of labels, but it was Trump was tweeting things that were clearly untrue. Right. And they were just putting little markings on it saying, look into that.
Right. And so we had Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, and the CEO.
Sundar Pichai.
Yeah, I'm really bad at pronouncing that. I didn't want to say it. But yeah.
I probably butchered it anyway.
So minus Jeff Bezos, these are like the three most powerful CEOs in the world, basically. And we had them on their heels in front of Congress right after a public event happened that totally puts them, in the wrong in a sense. And it puts them on, hey, you have some explaining to do. And the whole hearing was an absolute bullshit, disrespectful to all citizens time. If you watched it, it was insane. You literally have Democrats spending the entire questioning time using it to politicize the hearing at large, saying that Donald Trump is a corrupt president. And this is an example of that. And then you have other Democrats saying, don't worry about these Republicans. They're bullying you, which is a very used term now that invokes victimhood that is being widely used, which is a pet peeve of mine. But besides that, and you have the left completely polar opposites of the right, and they're the least of their concerns is getting to the bottom of how these companies are working and how this misinformation is spread, and instead focusing on the immediate politicalization of the most recent New York Post story to be able to use it in this next election for a final little kick in whatever, in votes. And it's like,
what did you say, the left or the right?
On both sides.
Okay, well, because you're talking about the Democrats so far, and how the left is having they're basically taking this opportunity to politicize it in one way.
Yeah.
But the right is doing the same. The right is just talking about, hey, you guys are censoring us unfairly, and why are we being censored but the left isn't? Like, we should be able to spread whatever information we want.
Right.
And they're using it as an opportunity to politicize. Basically, they're getting muzzled, and their lack of ability to spread disinformation. And
they're petulant in their questioning, where they're asking rhetorical statements. They're not even questions, and they are leading these CEOs, which I don't care what your opinion is on them. They're very smart people that know a lot of information, and they're talking to them as if they're a 12-year-old kid who's in trouble. And they're not asking questions to get information. They're asking questions to try to prove their own point, which gets us nowhere.
Well,
go ahead.
The event had been billed as a discussion about Section 230 of the CDA. Like, that was what the meeting was billed as. Oh, we're going to discuss Section 230 of CDA and see what comes of it. But instead, like you're saying, it was just posturing. The Republican senators accused the leaders of Twitter, Facebook, Google of censorship, and Democrats denounced it as posturing. That was the whole point of it. It was just like, oh yeah, we're going to make a political maneuver out of this. So they had all three of these people sitting down. And Stavi watched the whole thing. I did not watch the whole thing, but he was saying that Jack Dorsey showed up ready to talk.
Yeah. So in his opening statements, he literally, number one, exposed all the things that we're talking about today, highlighted them. And he first off, he started with CDA Section 230. And he said that this is a hugely immense, important tool to be able to protect the internet companies at large for immunity. And then so that the first thing is immunity of users' posts, right? So you just explained it. But then the second part he said was the Good Samaritan censorship based on good faith. And he said, hey, this is the problem area where there's big disagreements on what we say is good faith and what you guys think is good faith. And he said, this is where we need to build trust, communicate together, and build good faith in the name of what the people really want. And we're here to work with you. So that's what he said on CDA. And he said 3 solutions to work on that. 1, to have their services modification process to be published. So this is perfect. It's about transparency. It's saying, hey, out of anything we censor, and in every way we censor it, we're going to publish that. So we're going to tell you why we censored it, how we censored it, what metrics that they didn't meet up to, how this was hate speech, or whatever the metrics are, right?
So it's transparency of regulation.
Transparency of
Sounds
regulation.
great to me.
Number 2, he said a clear appeals process. And he said, we need to work with Congress to create something that has complete objective procedure. So that way, hey, if something does go wrong, we plug it into this appeals process. It goes through the steps, and without emotion or opinion, it gets ruled on based off of this bipartisan, commercial and government agreed upon appeal process. Another great idea. It's basically creating a clear framework for what's okay and what's not okay. Obviously, that could have some issues that we could talk about, but the fact that he's saying, hey, we don't want to create this framework solo. We need your guys' input to create this. We don't want to be liable for that.
And the only reason he is saying this is because they've tried to do it solo, and obviously Congress has an issue with it.
Exactly.
And so it's like, well, clearly, since we're not able to regulate ourselves, even though that's what was outlined in Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, and you guys are essentially overstepping your bounds, since you're having issues with it, we need to collaborate. That way, there isn't an issue.
Exactly. And then the third thing he said, which is I think the absolutely most important, is he said he wanted to build a market approach. And this, Stephen Wolfram did a TED Talk on this. You guys should look it up on YouTube. Not unrecommended though, just type it in exactly. But what this encourages is multiple different AI systems. And each individual user will be able to pick the AI system that they want to use. And so, number one, each AI system is going to have to be clearly defined on how it works, what are its metrics for operating, right? Like the AI systems in place right now are all based on an advertiser model, and the users have no choice in it. We by default go into this. But, imagine an AI that's bias on health or whatever, like if you're able to create these AIs. But then the most important thing to this was he said that these AIs are evaluated and monitored by a third-party organization, not the own companies themselves. And the final option is to remove the AI in general from the service.
Let's stick with that. Let's stick with that third option for a second, because remember that part earlier where I stumbled over what the point of Section of Article 230 was, and I said the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And I said it was like, it's a piece of the article that says to encourage the development of technologies which maximizes user control over what information is received by individuals, families, and schools who use the internet.
That is the market approach.
That is it right there. So he is literally, that's appealing to a section of Article 230.
Right. And dude, okay, Jack Dorsey, he has this big old beard, fucking nose ring, and he looks like a homeless person, right? But at the same time, and I know that just pisses people off, but when he was so at the beginning of this, for me at least, I had the intuition feeling that these are really well thought out ideas that he is sincere in wanting to act on. But literally, as soon as the questioning begun, it would just devolve to the point where after 15 minutes, you can see him become disenchanted. And he was like, wow, okay, we were at a hearing where real ideas could have been talked about, and this is what it's diving into. And you could just see him draw back, and all his answers go from long, good, sophisticated answers to just really quick answers. And because you can't have a legitimate, productive conversation with these Congress people in the way that they present and question the people. And it's
because the whole point of the meeting was to posture, was for political sway.
Exactly.
It was because the election was coming up, and they knew, the social dilemma came out. But
oh my God.
This is why earlier when we were saying it needs to be a grassroots movement, there needs to be actual public opinion and real people getting on board. And
because what do these politicians do?
Because
they
the politicians
parrot public opinion.
Well, they parrot public opinion, but I'm saying they don't want the system to change unless it's changing in their favor.
Right.
And what Jack Dorsey was offering was not going to change in the favor of people who pay for advertising. The political parties don't want to get rid of this advertising system. It is the best system they have ever had to sway public opinion. It's the best system they've ever had to pit people against one another, to make extreme polls out of the voting populace, to make it so people are persuadable, manipulatable across the world. This is the most controllable any economy has ever been, any populace has ever been, any electorate has ever been. They don't want to get rid of this system. And so these ideas, although grand and great, aren't going to be supported by the government at large.
Agreed.
When I first heard that, the right was talking about the need to amend Section 230, I was like, whoa, really? They're actually in favor of this thing? But no, their need to amend it was against further regulation. And so to me, it's the need for individuals to make it their responsibility to support people changing and granting control over what information is received by the individual. Literally part of Section 230.
And guess what?
It's necessary.
Twitter, Jack Dorsey, they don't need to wait to be mandated to do this either. I know, like we talked about, there's so much money and stuff at stake that they probably won't move in this direction unless forced to, but they have the option to. They can do this by choice. And like you were kind of saying, like before when we were off air, about there's a huge exploitation going on through people's attention, but then that it's creating this need for the other end of it, of a service that has non-exploitation, right?
Yeah.
If you want to break that down a little bit more.
So in one of the books we read, Behave, we first had our like really introduction into game theory. Sorry about that, guys. And but we had our first real introduction into game theory and essentially how certain strategies can pervade the entire market because they're successful. And when a strategy essentially becomes universal, there's a vulnerability in every strategy that leaves an opening for somebody else to come in with a different strategy.
Yeah.
And so right now, virtually every social media company, every media company is using this attention exploitative strategy, right? And so whether we want it or not, whether we pay for services or not right now, we are being sold for advertising agencies.
Go ahead.
Well, if you're gonna elaborate on that.
Yeah, I was gonna add on it. So right now, with these new players into this market, let's say TikTok, what they have to do is use these exploitive strategies even more. They have to go down the brainstem even farther. So they have to give you inflated likes and inflated responses to what your posts are to give you the illusion that you're having positive feedback, basically. So they're taking everything at play and just exploiting it further. And eventually that's going to run into a dead end, which is kind of what you're saying, like the other end of it.
So what's essentially happening is there's one strategy that every single company is using, and they're just trying to figure out how to be better at that strategy. Right. But instead of trying to get better at a strategy, another company can come along with a completely different strategy. Now that it's being brought to our attention, that we're being exploited and used for our attention, and that we're being stripped of control over our life, over our opinion, there is a marketplace for people who want to have control over that algorithm, to be able to dictate what they see, to be able to say, I only want to be on this for 10 minutes. Yeah. And
I want more than the like button. I want to be in control of how my recommended system works.
And with that, there is an opening for a new strategy. There's an opening for people to say, hey, we are actually going to charge more per month. We're going to charge a higher subscription. That way we can afford to pay our experts.
So, okay, so you're saying it's not an advertiser model.
No,
it's a subscription model.
It would be a subscription model. It would be that you are the user is paying for the service, which means if you're not paying for something, you are the product.
Okay.
As soon as you're paying for something, you're paying for the product, right? And so now it's the business's best interest to give you the best product that you want because you are their source of income.
Right.
So rewind a second.
So you're not paying for truth.
Right now, we're not paying for it.
Yep.
So advertisement is paying for it. And so it's up to the business to best serve the customer, who are the advertisers, and you, the user, are the product. So right now, the model is how can we best serve the user to our client, which is the advertiser. If instead...
And so what they're doing with the product, us, is making us simpler, easier to mass produce, easier to ship out. And we're put on the factory line to making us as similar as possible in simple packages. We send them to the consumer, the advertisers, so then they can exploit whatever their utility of us is.
So that's the current strategy. So instead, if there was a subscription model and the user was the client, then it would be up to the business to make the best product possible for the user. Not to make it so the user was stripped of their time, but that they got to use the exact amount of time in the exact amount of way that they wanted. So it would give the most control to the user. I think there is a market out right now, and that I know we got into this little argument before we started where you were saying that, well, I think it's going to be more likely that these current companies are going to come in and have to change their algorithms. I don't think that's going to happen. Any company that is publicly owned is going to have to somehow sell the idea to their shareholders. And shareholders are immediately going to see a drop in the viability of any of these companies, and they're going to completely say no. Right. So I think there's going to need to be a company that comes out of this grassroots movement that says, we are designing this for you and you alone. We will not have any advertisers on board, and we're not going to try to take your attention, but we are going to charge you more for it.
Right.
And I know I'd be willing to pay for that right now. I would be more than willing to pay for a service where I could get the exact information I wanted and nothing more. Like, I think, I don't know why I haven't heard about this. I wish I knew how to code, or I knew a bunch of people who know how to code, because it's not like one person can do this. It needs to be like hundreds.
There's other sources, like there's this new one, ThinkSpot, that I subscribe to, which is similar, and it's all academic journals and speakers, and it's a place to post information that's been peer reviewed and published. And there's spots like that coming up. But when I look at what's going on and the grip and the hold that these big companies have and the amount of users that they have already, that in order for us to create a lasting positive change and get out of this bad cycle, we need these companies to shift.
So I just think that's going to take time. And I think I think they're going to need a leader. I think they're going to need somebody to follow suit. So quickly, just to kind of show how this game theory plays out. Lettuce. Let's talk about lettuce for a second, right? This is the example that we're familiar with. So before organic lettuce came to be, it was in the grocery store, there was lettuce on the shelf, and it was a race to the bottom in terms of price. That was lettuce doesn't taste like much. It just crunches if you get the iceberg lettuce, or it's leafy if you don't get the iceberg lettuce. But there's nothing really that makes it better or worse. And so the only thing people were looking for was, how much does it cost? And so it was a race for farmers and agricultural companies to see how cheaply they can make their lettuce. How can we make it so we use less water? How can we make it so we need less human hours to harvest each head of lettuce? Until somebody said, hey, there's a new opportunity here, because people are becoming more aware of their health. They're becoming more aware of pesticides, because, hey, guess what? It's cheaper to use pesticides than it is to have a bunch of lettuce that goes bad because some sort of pest got on it. So it's like, okay, well, each eater of the lettuce is going to just have a little bit of poison, but that's no big deal. It's cheaper to make. They're happy with the price. It's good. This is what happens when you serve the market what it wants, by the way. The market wanted cheap, and they were willing to overlook poison. Right. So earlier when you say give the market what it wants, anytime you're giving the market what it wants, it's going in the wrong direction. Like there's a space in the market for what it needs. And then people start to want what they need. But so anyways, let me finish.
Real quick though, when you say about the market always starts in the wrong direction, iterated over enough times, it leads to where we're going. So yes, in the present time, the market may lead us in a bad direction, but iterated over enough times without weird regulation over the market, it projects us to a beneficial
Absolutely, because vulnerabilities pop up.
Exactly.
But so everybody was racing to the bottom, and then somebody realized that there's a new market on the table, that people want to be healthy. People want food without pesticide, without poison. And it's going to cost them more money. And then we're going to sell something completely different. We're going to sell organic food that is going to be marketed as healthy, but it's going to cost 3 times as much. And people were more than happy to pay for it. Not everybody, right? It's still not the most popular choice, but it is a choice, and it's a choice a lot of people are making, and it's becoming more popular over time. There's more Whole Foods popping up. There's more.
Before it was only your local farmers market that had it, and now you have Dole and all these big, produce companies that all make organic now. They had to convert to capitalize on this new emerging market.
And it's the same exact strategy that can happen for social media, that can happen for information dissemination, where it will cost more because there won't be an additive. You won't be being sold, right? Mm-hmm. So you're going to have to pay more, but you'll be in control.
Totally.
It'll be better for your health.
I totally agree. And I think this will just help these big companies transition quicker.
Exactly.
If there's a legitimate, that's kind of what we just said. But it would be really hard for the big existing companies to just switch right away, right? So, but what they need to do is incremental changes, as making more transparency, kind of some of the stuff that Jack outlined, right? Choose over AI. Hey, when we do recommendation videos on YouTube, you get to choose between 20 different metrics on what kind of stuff you want. There's more than just the like button. There's a spectrum of stuff. And then, oh, guess what? Like, we're going to understand what information you're giving to advertisers and what those advertisers are doing with that information, right? Transparency everywhere. And that will, along with these new emerging companies, help the transition forward. Because the thing is, it's all good and dandy, we get a new company, but these big existing companies are just exploiting, affecting elections. And you think it's bad in the United States? Look into the global South. Look into all these little countries in Africa. And like you can legitimately track the change in political ideology, decisions, behavior, all through Facebook and social media. And so this stuff is not going to change just because some new company comes up. So although I do think you're correct, and now that we really fleshed that out, I totally agree with you.
Before this, he was completely denying my idea.
I was really denying the probability of that actually affecting enough change to make it worth it. But with the basically gaining public knowledge along with a good product will give pressure to these other companies, and then hopefully these other companies will have enough foresight to see, hey, this is where we need to go, and I want to jump in that organic market now and not be the last one over.
So, quick example. So let's take a look at Nike.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the 70s or 80s, whenever it was 60s, what is it? 60s, Prefontaine ran. It's this guy who was short for his race, and his coach taught him how to heel strike. And so shoe companies came out with elevated heels on their shoes, right? This is going to be a really quick tangent. But so anyway, over the course of 30 years or so, it was found that these elevated shoe heels while running gave people shin splints, knee issues, stress fractures, hip injuries, and smaller companies started popping up that gave people a barefoot running experience. You started to get those Vibram, like 5-finger toe shoes, which I would never wear. Yeah. And you got other shoes that had just like very minimal support.
About to shameless pitch yourself.
No, I'm not going to pitch myself. I'm not even going to mention it. Yeah, I'm making one of those shoes right now. But anyway, so these companies started coming out with this new idea of a shoe. It actually has less structure, less technology in it. And it was completely contrary to the way the market was going.
Right.
But it showed some success. And because it showed success, Nike, New Balance, all these other like big mainstream shoe companies came out with their own line of that idea. They came out with their own version of the minimal shoe. You have the New Balance Minimus, these are high quality shoes now. But they wouldn't have done that without these smaller companies popping up first.
Right.
And then they followed suit because they realized there was a market. And so the shareholders need a promise that if we make this shift, the market will still show us some success.
Totally.
And so these small companies need to happen. They need to have proof that there is a market for it, for anybody to allow these bigger companies to make a change in their algorithm, to make a change in their AI.
And okay, this is a perfect little segue into, so I read this article by Andy Kessler from the Wall Street Journal, and it was all about Section 230 in the CDA. And a lot of politicians are saying, oh, we want to totally remove the bill, basically, like it's obsolete, blah, blah, blah. But what he pointed out to was that, hey, if you remove this and now all these companies are liable for all the content being published, now the censorship is going to go off the wazoo, and they're going to be censoring
the wazoo.
And they're going to be censoring everything. And not only that, it's going to cost a lot of money to do that. And because you are liable for everything, they can't just use algorithms to investigate everything. They're gonna have to hire real people. Real people cost a lot of money, blah, blah, blah. I think that's all good and dandy for the big companies, but guess what? When you have a new company, let's say someone in college like Mark Zuckerberg was, and he wants to create a new social platform that like we're talking about right here, well, guess what? If you don't have CDA 230, there's gonna be so much liability, potential lawsuits, and money need to be invested on censorship that it won't give enough room for these new companies to start up.
Well, so are you recommending stripping CDA 230?
No, I'm saying that Andy Kessler pointed out that you have Trump tweeting it, you have Democrats tweeting it, basically saying to remove the bill in general because it's obsolete.
Oh, fuck that.
Exactly. And so what I'm saying is it's really important that we understand that we need it, but we need modification on it, because this is what enabled the internet to grow. This is what allows the small companies to be able to have a chance.
Really quickly, I don't really know if we need more modification of it. I think we need the market shifts.
Right.
Like I think trust in the market is the way to go, because right now you have people like you and I realizing that we're being sold. And that CDA 230 has a lot built in it. It allows a company to not be liable for what people post, but remove posts that they want. Mm-hmm. And they can remove any post that they want, even if it's protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution.
Right.
So what that means is that each company, each brand is building their own community values. It's building their own brand and building their own like population and being able to say what they care for, what they're going to protect, and what they're going to strip. Right. So you have people on the right wanting to change it because they're saying, hey, you can't strip us of our First Amendment rights. But any restaurant is able to say, we're going to refuse service to you.
Yes, totally.
Right?
Totally. Yeah.
So any website is able to say, hey, we're going to refuse to allow you to post, regardless of who the fuck you are and what you're saying.
Exactly. And that's why what Andy Kessler said was there needs to be a clear transparency on what those community standards are. That's what Jack Dorsey said in his opening statement, that we need to have transparency and we need collaboration to come to an overall decision on what Good Samaritan faith community standards are. And so it's like, in order for that to happen, we need to at least be all on the same page of like that's the issue here. And the problem is when you have people like Ted Cruz is going up yelling at the CEOs, basically telling them that they're being political pundits for the left, and just not realizing that like, hey, these are the mechanisms that allow bad stuff like that to happen. Well, we don't get anything done, you know?
Well, and to that point, because if we gave that power to the companies, then the companies would be in control. Right. So they would be in control of public opinion. Right. So I do agree that there needs to be a third regulatory party. Right. And it doesn't need to be part of the government, but it does need to be nonpartisan. It does need to be about the public well-being and truth and fact. Totally. But that needs to be outsourced to a third company that is not attached to the well-being of the companies who are hosting social media platforms.
Right. And okay, we kind of dived into a lot, and I think because, you know, if you haven't mailed in your ballot and you're going to go vote in person, like it's in the next couple of days, right? And, you know, these are the last chances you have to really make a decision on, you know, how we're going to vote, which is going to most likely, you know, determine a lot of different directions the country's taking. So I think it's going to be important to break down, as far as we know, the manipulation that's happened through social media and just kind of the evolution of it. So I want to start in 2008. So Barack Obama's first campaign to become president was the first time we actually used social media political ads. And at the time, basically 100%, it was his own personal policy. 100% of all the ads had to be positive, and they had to be just focused on him. So if there was any ads that was anti-Hillary Clinton, they would have to be physically removed by their campaign team, taken off. There's no attacking the other party. It's only positive reinforcement on their own ads. And, you know, honestly, like, that's what we want, right? Like in a sense, like we want social media to give outlets for politicians to be able to spread, you know, what they're trying to do and the change they're trying to make. Like it allows someone you haven't heard of gain popularity. Like Obama was only one-term senator, wasn't widely known, but yet through social media was able to create this like groundswell of support and movement. And so much of that was enabled by social media. And good, bad, or whatever, what do you think about President Obama? I think he was very refreshing after, you know, a 2-term Bush office. And, you know, he's not perfect. And, your opinions or whatever. But the fact that
refreshing, like a cold drink of water.
Yeah,
it's refreshing. Asshole.
But yeah, so they enable positive things to happen like that. They give people a vector to push their opinions and to say what they want to say without having to buy ads on Fox News, CNN, whatever. And so that was all good. But what happened was when the 2016 election rolls around, right now you have the Trump campaign that literally committed super PAC, which is like basically hundreds of millions of dollars on campaign ads, purely on negative ad focusing. So like nothing was, oh, this is why you should vote for Trump. This is what he'll do. It's all, don't vote for Hillary. She's crooked Hillary. She's blah, blah, blah. Like completely using like what we talked about before, fear and your limbic system mechanisms to control behavior and thought. And so they would tap in to your lizard brain and be able to use all the profiles built on social media to micro target you and to specifically send ads to make you not vote, to vote a certain way, and basically at free will create voter suppression. And like that, I have a few. You got anything to add while I organize my thoughts here? Because I got some stats I just said.
Well, so here's the thing. Prior to social media advertising, this is something I never thought about. Hopefully somebody is still watching at this point so they can hear this thought too. But prior to social media advertising, everybody was able to see the commercials and the advertisements of both political parties. So if a Republican campaign put out an advertisement that was slashing some Democratic nominee,
right,
the Democratic Party would be able to see it and counter it, and vice versa. Democratic ads come out that are saying, oh, the Republican is X, Y, or Z. The Republican Party is able to see it. Yeah. And again, counter it. Now with social media, you have there's so many ads. I'm still talking, motherfucker.
Yes,
sorry. There's so many ads out there that nobody will ever see other than the person who was targeted.
Right.
And so with this big veil, this big cloak that's surrounding what's being put out there, it's impossible for a debate to happen. It's impossible for people to counter the opposing party's point. And with that, there's no pursuit of truth. There's no need for it, because you can just say whatever you want, knowing that the other people are never going to see it. The other party will never see it. And this is where there was a proposed act that hit the House floor in 2019, May 7th, 2019. What's up?
Oh, I was looking at my chops because I wanted to go on and some other stuff.
Sorry.
No. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, anyway, this is just a quick.
Yeah.
It was called the Honest Ads Act, and it was to enhance the integrity of our democracy by improving disclosure requirements for online political advertisements. What that means, any service that had more than 50 million users would be required to be completely transparent about what ads were paid for. It was required to house the information, to store the information of anybody who paid for political ads, and they were able to they would be required to be transparent about pocket audiences, so that if one group of people was shown an ad, that group of people would be able to be seen and also used by the opposing party. This prevented this blind advertising, this like unknowing population from existing, because everybody would be able to see who it was and what ads they were seeing. So this would allow, once again, for some sort of debate to occur, for one party to say it's like this and the other party to say no, it isn't.
Right.
And of course, this act fell flat on the House floor. It was brought up once, May 7th, 2019, and shut down. Yeah. So that's the current state of affairs that we're sitting on. Anyways.
No, yeah.
And collect your thoughts.
No, that's perfect. It's a perfect example of how it, even if when these bills are presented that totally hit the nail on the head of what we need to do, it's like, I never heard of that until I dug into research to even see that was on the House floor. And it's like, why aren't these Congress people well-versed enough to know, hey, this is an important bill. Let me try to spread this as much as I can. So, maybe that's my lack of, knowledge seeking at the time. But the fact that we had to dig for that when that's exactly what's needed is just an example of how our system isn't functioning properly. But going back to the campaign, So what they do is they build these lookalike modeling. So
who's they and which campaign?
okay, so sorry. The Trump campaign, who specifically hired Cambridge Analytica to handle most of their ads. Not all of them, but specific super PACs hired this company to create ads and media. They're the ones who created the Crooked Hillary meme. Trump said it, and then they created the meme and established it, dispersed it through the internet. And you should watch The Great Hack on them because there's a lot to talk about them. They basically illegally took data profiles from. So if someone signed up, admittedly, to their advertising, if you were a friend of that person, you automatically, all your profile information was shared with them. So they illegally got all this data points, and Facebook, although they worked hand in hand with them, completely had zero liability, and it was all put on just that company, even though Facebook was knowingly working with them doing all this stuff. They literally had a Facebook team working in their room. And that's another example about how these social media companies are basically exempt from any type of liability, and they get a loophole. Going back to the campaign, I had to say that. So they use, so Cambridge Analytica uses these lookalike modeling, which all advertisers do this now. And basically you take a group of 1,000 people, 10,000 people, and they all create this certain type of similarity patterns. That's like viewpoints on the world, how they think they're going to vote, whatever their metrics are. And then they plug it in to Facebook, and it pops out, and they're like, oh, I want 100,000 profiles that are like this. I want 500,000 profiles that are like this. And then boom, it pops you back a list of all these profiles that match to a certain degree of similarity to what you want. And then they're able to target those people specifically. And so what they did was there's these people deemed persuadables. And so with their AI system, they were able to determine which people were most likely vulnerable to having their views changed, to be able to change their actual behavior. And then they focused on the swing states, so like Ohio, Michigan, and they bombarded them with all these negative ads. And so you're getting Crooked Hillary, lazy Ted, or whatever, or Lion Ted. That's what it was. And they create these anchors to these people that gives you a bias. And now every time you think about Hillary Clinton, you think she's crooked. And if you're a Democrat and you're not going to vote for Trump, well, what this is going to do is prevent you from voting at all, right? And so they're able to use all these manipulations. Like there was over 1 million ads by Trump in the 2016 election that they published, and it's honestly like creepy.
It's gerrymandering at its finest.
Exactly.
So it's the thing. It's this same models that have been around for a long time. This is why I brought up so many other media regulation points. Is because it's the same models, but getting exponentially better. So this gerrymandering is to the point where obviously very successwell. I want to bring up a point from The Great Hack. So and because I know it's easy for us to think, oh, well, they wouldn't get me. I'm not a persuadable. I'm not on the fence. Like I'm immune to that. And so they demonstrated how complex their strategies might be in a country in Africa. And I'm blanking on the name of the country, so that kind of sucks. But where the majority of the population in Africa, and not in Africa, in this one country in Africa, were either Indian or black.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And so Cambridge Analytica was hired by the Indian campaigning person, the Indian candidate. And their strategy became, because they wanted to get this person elected. So in order to get them elected, they came up with this idea of making a don't vote, rebellious youth movement. And they hired hip hop groups. They hired bands. They made a dance that was all about don't vote. And it was like, they had this X dance where they do this weird thing and X. And it was like, the idea was, oh, the youth population is going to rebel against the adults and not vote in this election. Now, Cambridge Analytica knew that the Indian children were more disciplined by their parents than the black children in this particular country.
So the parents would force them to go vote.
The parents would say, no, I don't care about your movement. You're going to go vote, and you're going to vote for this person. And so with this seemingly independent musical youth revolution or rebellion, they got it so the black youth didn't vote and the Indian youth did, and it was able to successfully get their Indian candidate in office. And so it's something that can seem benign or seem unrelated. And that's how in-depth these strategies can be. And so it's like, you may think you're immune to it, but we're not. None of us are.
And Brittany Kaiser is the person that worked for Cambridge Analytica that was mentioning that. And I also have listened to her on a few other things, but she after she worked for this company and after things like that, she began to see all kind of movements around the world that matched the pattern that happened in this instance. And what she said was, if you see a unified overarching statement that is just shared without a bunch of conflicting different ideas on the topic, and then people go out to protest right away, there's way greater chance than not that was a concocted movement by some company or government in order to create a certain outcome. She said grassroots movements and real movements are usually very complex and divided on the ideas at the beginning and take a long time for people to actually get to the streets to go protest. And so, when we see in 2016 all the Tiki Torch people going out, when we see all these Black Lives Matter marches going out so quickly, I'm not saying that these are manipulated by these forces, but because well, I'm not saying definitively because I don't know.
Yeah, I gotcha.
But I do know that these systems are in place that have done that before in a bunch of other circumstances, and to not think it a possibility that some of these other movements that appear grassroots really aren't, because they match the profile of how these things are created by these big companies like this. And that right there just shows you the magnitude of manipulation, where actual full countries, government and regimes are completely controlled by a English software company named Cambridge Analytica, and it's like,
at this point, it's far beyond Cambridge Analytica.
Obviously,
it's every social media company. I mean, Facebook seems to be individually responsible now for multiple genocides in multiple different countries, Myanmar and in China.
Yeah.
And
hold on real quick. So just going back into specifically with the Trump campaign, when I talked about they're the group that found out that neurotic people respond at a way higher level degree to fear than anything else. So they were able to find all the neurotic people and only send them fear-based messaging. And they started micro ads where sometimes it'd only be 10 to 50 people would get that specific ad.
Wow.
That when there's millions, hundreds of millions of people that they're sending this information to, and they're micro-targeting to 10 to 50 people, that shows you how complex it is that they can identify, number one, this might be an influencer, so it's someone to focus on, and this is a persuadable influencer, and it's like it just goes down and down and down to see the exploitation of this service that leads to outcomes that the hiring company wanted, and it's not truth. It's not what society wants. It's what these organizations want, So you go ahead with what you're saying. So I'm going to roll.
I mean, I got to go soon. I would come to
yeah, totally.
Come to the end of my time, at least, because I got to go to work.
Okay. So before we leave, I want to give some actions that you could do right now to prevent the social media takeover.
Well, yeah. Okay. So
go ahead.
One, I don't know what your actions are, but I wrote my own list.
Let's hear it.
One is you need to identify yourself as a fact checker. Like, It's not enough to watch a video. It's not enough to just take in one person's thoughts, but you have to actively seek out long form information. Read a couple articles. Make sure they're articles from opposing sides of sources.
Totally.
So that's number one. We can go. I'll do mine, then you can do yours.
Yeah.
One, be a fact checker.
Okay.
Number two, slow down. Don't share it just yet. Right? There was some study that showed that 70% of article shares occur before the person's even read that article. And funnily enough, there was an article that went around that said this exact headline. And after one paragraph, there was nothing in it, just a bunch of gobbledygook. But people sent it anyway because they didn't read it yet. So it was like, slow down. Don't add to it. Instead, research a little bit before you share. Next, you have to figure out who's behind this information. What is the source you're getting the information from? Because a lot can be discovered, even just figuring out it's from Fox, or figuring out it's from MSNBC, or figuring out it's from Forbes or New York Times or Wall Street Journal. You can know like which way that information is skewed, and then go look for opposing viewpoints, because you're not going to find the truth when you just stick to one side of the spectrum. You're going to find an opinion on the truth.
Right.
So who's behind this information? What's the evidence? AKA, is this just an opinion? You know, where is this? Where's the fact in this article? Where is the fact in this statement? And then finally, kind of summing it up, what do other sources say? You know, it's one source isn't going to have the truth. So you have to look a little deeper, label yourself a fact checker, label yourself a beacon of truth, and try to identify with somebody who doesn't, you don't want to add to the problem. We don't want to add to the problem. We're not trying to exploit people. So yeah, those are things you can do right now before changes occur in the algorithm, before changes occur in AI. You can be the change.
Right. And I think that those are all great tips onto how to get the correct and true information, how to avoid like propaganda and misinformation. But when we're talking about how do we get away from the social media services gaming your attention, how you have to disconnect from them. So you have to, in my opinion, number one, you have to turn off all your notifications. Okay, the only notifications you should probably have is text messaging and maybe email, depending on what your job is. But most likely, you're going to have a computer that you could sit at certain times. So you set aside time for your Instagram, for your Facebook. So that way, hey, I'm going to go on there for a half an hour and I'm going to go through all my stuff. And then when that half an hour is done, I'm going to be done with it. And you're not going to get that vibrating tick in your pocket every time a little notification pops up, because they specifically send notifications to you when you're not using it and properly, or you're using it less and less. And they try to game the system to get you to use it more. Number two, if you're using the sites themselves, like we're posting on YouTube, only use it to post instructive stuff. Like, don't be one of those people who's trying to game the system to get viewers, right? Be honest with your work. And on the other end of it, if you're not posting things, when you're researching stuff, specifically type in what you're looking for. Do not use the recommendation algorithms. Like, go find what you want, like through your own search mechanisms. So I kind of just molded the last two together, damn it. But yeah, so I'm going over real quick. Turn off your notifications. Only use it to post instructive stuff. Use it for specific reasons. Do not use recommended items.
Another thing you can do is you can actually go onto your phone and limit the amount of time you want to spend on certain applications. So you can put a 20-minute timer on your Instagram where you can only use it for 20 minutes in a day.
Right.
And that alone will help you, one, use that service more efficiently. So like, oh, I'm on here, I'm only going to use 5 minutes right now. What do I want to see? Mm-hmm. And two, it can prevent you from going on 2-hour time dumps, right? Getting stuck in the vortex.
Right. All right. And last thing, our book recommendation. So you didn't bring one this week, so I'm going to do it again this week.
What are you talking about? I brought one. It's just your book.
Well, we haven't read it yet, so we gotta know more about it before we put it on there. I'm reading this one. So this one right here by Scott Adams, How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. Very popular book, so you've probably heard of it. But I'm only like 55 pages in or something like that, and it's absolutely awesome. It's really entertaining, and at the same time, teaching you how to create a systems-based approach rather than a goals-based approach. And it makes total sense. And it's all about learning how to simplify your decision-making into systems, and that you can get productivity and wins every day by just following your systems. And yeah, I recommend that you guys read this book, and it'll help you to be able to think about the world more clearly and how to prioritize what's important and how you could actually affect change within first yourself, then your family, then your community, then your city at large, then your country, and learning how to build yourself up so you can actually be a worthwhile citizen to then help other people around you. I think it's a great book. And we also have been forgetting to say, please fucking comment on our goddamn video so we can get some feedback. Because what we're saying here, we're not trying to say everything we're saying is fact, everything we're saying is right. This is to the best of our ability, and we're trying to create discussion. We're trying to create conversation with people. We talk bullshit all the time together, but you know, we're only two people. We have our own biases. We have our own cognitive dissonance. We want engagement. We want to be able to hear what other people are saying, so that way we can then communicate with you, and we can create a community of people that are all talking, trying to come to real truths in this age of like misinformation.
Well, and the pursuit of truth requires conversation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? It requires opposing viewpoints. It requires people to disagree with each other and to be open to disagreement. And right now we're in this climate where it's scary to disagree with people, because you don't know what they're going to label you. You don't know how they're going to react. You don't know if they're going to stop being your friend, or whether they're going to think worse or less of you.
Yeah.
And we're putting ourselves out there every time we have one of these conversations,
Right,
with the hope that you will engage,
Yeah.
right? With the hope that we can spark a conversation and we can start some sort of fire of truth, some sort of way for us to light up the night right now, because right now it's getting very dark with this disinformation that's spreading around, and the tools are only growing more complex and better. So it's very important right now to speak up and to join the conversation. So yeah, we hope somebody made it to the end of this.
yeah. Please comment.
That's
we'll get to you for sure. Not a long list so far.
But thank you so much. We're, again, going to be trying to pump out these podcasts like once a week, but right now it's looking like once every other week for the foreseeable future.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good one.
Enjoy. Hopefully go out and vote, obviously.
Oh yeah. Go vote.
Okay.